This is one of my favorite lessons. It's really interesting because when you learn the lesson and you tell it over and over and over again, it takes root inside of you and you live it. You live it. That's why it's important when we're teaching, you do it over and over again so it takes root. If you listen closely to this last story, you're going to hear culture in there too and have an understanding of our ways. There was a young man, and he was renowned as a hunter. And this young man had done the things he needed to do to prove that he was a young man. He had to first prove that he could care for his family, his extended family, and his community. Because that is the way of our people. And once he had proven those things, then he earned the privilege to have a wife. He was very excited. And so as he moved through his life and traveled through village to village, he met a young woman. He thought, And then he found out that she had proven that she was a woman and that she could care for her family, her extended family, and her community, because we are people of community and care for one another. The poorest of the poor is the wisest in our tribes, and they give from here and not worry. And so those two came together and they decided to join their lives. And it was good. And then he went to live with her in her village. That's our way. You go with the woman's family. And it was good. He met his relatives. He liked them. They were good people. And then he met his brother-in-law. They were about the same age. And they had similar interests, except for one thing his brother-in-law could not see. But the hunter knew that his brother was wise beyond his years. And so every evening they would talk and share. And one night his brother-in-law said, I always wanted to go hunting, but no one will take me. And I was thinking one day, if you would consider taking me hunting, I would appreciate it. The hunter, he puffed up. Yes, I am the finest hunter in all the lands. I will start teaching you tonight. So every night he taught him more and more. And finally comes the day when he said, tomorrow we go hunting. He was so excited. So he rose early in the morning, because that's when you go hunting. And they had everything they needed, and they headed off. And they went across the village and into the forest. And as they did, the hunter was talking, and all of a sudden his brother-in-law said, shh, do you hear that? And the hunter said, hear what? There's a mountain lion pushing her cubs underneath the tall grasses. She's coming this way. Whew! There she was. She stood right in front of them and looked at them and took off. And the hunter thought, my senses are keen, but his are keener. And then they continued to walk. And all of a sudden his brother-in-law said, do you hear that? And he said, no, what is it? It is a bird unfolding her wings. And overhead she flew. And the hunter thought, whoa, this happened all day. And at one point he said, do you smell that? And the hunter said, no, fresh water. Oh yes, that is where we'll put our trap. So they moved that way. And he looked at his brother-in-law and said, you set your trap here. I will travel to the other side and set my trap. But wait for me. And so that's what they did. And the hunter, he put his trap down and he covered it completely. You could not see it. He was good. And then he came over and he looked at his brother-in-law's trap. It was as plain as day. But the hunter was tired and he thought he's not going to catch anything anyway. So he said, let's go. So they headed home. So the next morning, earlier than the morning before, they rose, because we have this saying that we believe that once something has given its life to us, we respect it and we make sure that we are there so it does not suffer. And so they moved through. And this time, his brother-in-law was doing what a lot of people do. He was like, do you think I caught something? I hope I got something. Do you think I really got something? I am so excited. I've never been hunting before, but this would be so great if the first I meet. And the hunter said, if we haven't caught anything, we won't catch anything because everybody knows we're coming. So hush. So his brother-in-law was like, okay, I'm not going to say anything, but I really hope I got something. And so they move. And they come to that place. And the hunter goes to where his trap is. And he pushes it back. And there is a beautiful brown bird. And he takes from his side those sacred herbs. And he said, Kishala Mokwang, thank you for giving us this gift. And he gave Kisha the blessing. And then he bent down. And he gave him the sacred herbs, and he said, Wanishi, for giving your life to our people. And then he picked it up, and he carried it over, and he walked over to his brother's trap, and he knew nothing. And he looked down and was like, whoa, oh my goodness. And inside the trap was a bird that was so beautiful. It was though that bird had flown through the rainbow, and it had covered all its feathers in 1,000 colors. And the hunter looked down and thought, my wife would love that bird. She would love those feathers. There is so much she would do with them. But my brother-in-law's wife would love that bird's feathers too. And he was thinking back and forth, and he knew the right thing to do. Do you? And so together they spoke the words to Kishala Mokwang of thanks. Together they gave thanks for the bird. And then he took that bird out. He walked over to his brother-in-law and said, you have caught something. And he placed that brown bird in his brother-in-law's hands. And then they put them in their pouch and they walked. And as they walked, the red star watches over us and knew what to do. Sent the heat down until they were so hot. And the hunter said, let's rest. Let's share water together. Nip, and they did. And while they were sitting there, the hunter looked at his brother-in-law. He said, you know so much. I have always wondered this. Why do men fight? And why do they war against one another? And his brother-in-law looked at him into his eyes as though he could see straight to his spirit in the center of his being. And he said, men fight and men war because they do to one another what you did to me back there. And the hunter knew not what to say. He knew not what to do, but his head hung in shame. And after a while, he lifted that beautiful colored bird out of his pouch and he handed it to his brother-in-law. And his brother-in-law gave him back the brown bird. And they still sat. And the hunter said, My brother-in-law, once men have fought and once men have war, can they ever come back together again? And he looked into his eyes as though he could see, and into the center of his being. And he said, once they have fought and once they have war, they can come back together only when they have made the wrong right again. For many tribal people, there is no words for sorry. You must make the wrong right again. So much wrong has been done, and so much fighting and warring. But it is not until you work and make it right again. Our belief is different than many others who say, I'm sorry. So when we make the right, we see it differently. How many of us are willing to do the work to make it right? It's work, but it is so worth it, so that the future generations will not have to struggle to make the wrongs right. Let us do the work so our children don't.